Hi everyone, welcome to Mission DIY. I'm going to show you how I made this vertical wall hanging chest set for Russ's birthday. It was really hard to find time to make this beast without Russ knowing, so I had to wait until he went on his fishing trip. This took me about 16 hours to make, but having been my first woodworking project, there were a bunch of things that I had to redo because I'm just starting out. I've learned that woodworking is a whole lot different than any remodeling project I've done before. It was super fun, and I'm really proud of myself in the end. To make my chessboard, I first started with 1x4 strips of pine and walnut. My board is 24 wide by 26 inches tall, so I started by cutting the width of each board to 26 to allow for extra when cutting the width down to small squares. I sliced the strips in half long ways to make them into two pieces, and then ripped them down to 3¼ inches. With all 8 strips together, this will become the 26-inch tall dimension. Next, I glued all the strips together with alternating colors. I used the strap clamp to keep everything tight, but it wasn't really working. The boards were too thin to use this method. So I found some scrap low-grade plywood we had and glued the strips to the board. I would recommend using a high-grade plywood instead. You'll see why later. I didn't have the proper clamps, so I found anything heavy that I could weigh the boards down with. While the chessboard was drying, my next step was making all the shelf strips where the chess pieces would sit. I first cut one long strip in half to make 2 equal pieces and ripped those down to 1½ inches wide. Since the chessboard is 24 inches wide, I rough cut all the shelf boards to roughly 25 inches, so I could make more accurate cuts later. I also labeled each piece according to my plans. Then I started working on the drawer to store the chess pieces when they're killed during a game. I didn't like the thought of storing them on the top shelf of the entire game set, as I've seen in other designs, so I wanted to add a drawer. I liked the idea of a tip-out drawer and found a kit in the kitchen department at Home Depot. I made the size of the compartment to fit within the space after the hinges were installed. I glued everything up and then came back with my drill and some finishing nails the next day. After the board was dry, I cut off the excess plywood, and then cut the board across in the opposite direction of the alternating boards. I set the fence on the table saw so each strip would be 3 inches. And then I laid out the pieces, flipping every other one to get the checkered design. I glued all the sides together and again tried using the strap clamp. The board still wanted to buckle up in the middle, so I got rid of that and got fancy with the use of all the clamps we have. I think we have about 5 good clamps and a handful of flimsy ones too, but they did the trick. While I was waiting for all of that to dry, I went on to cutting the little blocks for the checkers. I cut 2x2 pine board into 1-inch blocks, and for the kings in the checkers set, I cut 2-inch blocks. I sanded all the rough edges down using a sanding block. Since I couldn't find any 2x2 walnut boards at Home Depot, I decided to just purchase stain for the darker checker pieces. I stained them all, including the drawer storage compartment. And for the lighter pieces, I used a polish I made the night before. For the last move in King Me signs, I used a wood burner pen on some scrap pine strips from this project. I cut each piece to size, which was about 2 inches high, and glued them to some small clothespins I purchased from a craft store. Even though I had clamped the board and weighed it down as best as I could, I still ended up with a very jagged board, as seen here. Since we don't have a planer, I used a disc sander, starting with a coarse grit and making my way down to a fine grit. Overall, the board came out pretty smooth, but it does have some waviness, which could have been eliminated with use of a planer. I made final cuts along each side of the board to get it to its final dimension of 26 tall by 24 inches wide. The board is 2 inches taller than wide to accommodate the thickness of each shelf. Each square will have the illusion of being a perfect square. I cut the sides of the chessboard out of 1x4 walnut. I didn't really measure these, I just laid out all the pieces up against the board so I could get a perfect marking, and then cut mitered corners. Next, I sanded each piece of wood with a fine grit before applying the wax polish. I made the wood polish from scratch with simple and all-natural ingredients. The wax is also food safe, so you could use this if you're making a cutting board or on any wood projects in the kitchen. Check out the description below for a link to the recipe and tutorial. The wax made the natural beauty of the wood really pop, and I really enjoyed using it because it smelled so good. With my board cut down to final size, I confirmed the measurement for the shelves and cut those to the exact width of the chessboard. I then glued them directly to the board. I set everything back up to take a measurement for the drawer front, and then set up all the boards on top until the glue dried under the shelves. Next, I cut a groove in a 1x4 piece of walnut on both sides of the board, which would become the rails and stiles for the drawer front. Once the center panel fit in the grooves, I ripped the board to make 1.5 inch rails and stiles. I then cut the length of the rails and stiles by fitting the drawer front together and marking where to cut. I waxed all the pieces of the drawer front and glued and clamped everything together. You can see that this wax is really bringing out the beauty of this walnut. I finally put all the pieces of the chess set together and glued up the corners. I used the strap clamp again, and this time it actually worked nicely. I had drilled pocket holes in the middle board for more stability and went back the next day and put the screws in. I also pre-drilled holes in all of the corners so I could add nails for stronger mitered corner joints, and countersunk each nail. At this point, the chessboard itself was just sitting inside the frame and was not yet attached. It was just acting as a spacer for the frame pieces. I removed the board from the frame and drilled several pocket holes along each edge. This is where I wished I had used a higher grade plywood. The low grade didn't hold its form very well and tended to shred up like it was going through a cheese grater. I put the board back inside and attached a few screws from the bottom before flipping it on its side and finishing all of the screws. I filled all of the nail holes and any imperfections with walnut wood filler and gave it a good fine sanding and another coat of wax. I attached the tip-out drawer hinges to the frame according to the included mounting instructions. I decided to make the drawer compartment again because I didn't like how the wood stain looked on the pine. Plus, I had just enough walnut left over to piecemeal a new one. When the glue on the drawer front was dry, I sanded it smooth and gave it another coat of wax. It was the exact size of the opening, but since it needs to move more freely, it needs about a 1/16 to an 1/8 inch of space on each side. So I used the table saw to shave a tiny bit off each end until I got a perfect fit, and the drawer was able to smoothly open and close without any rubbing. For this, I had to attach it, test it out, then take it off, shave a tiny bit off, then attach it again, and keep going until I got the perfect fit. I ended up having to make a bunch of adjustments to my drawer compartment from the original design intent. I'll likely end up remaking it yet again because I didn't make the back high enough so the pieces don't fall out. This project has been a huge learning experience for me, and I'll know better next time. At this point, Russ was going to be home soon, and I had to make do with what I had. A slightly jaded drawer compartment was better than no drawer compartment at all, especially since I attached it with screws that can easily be removed in the future to switch it out with a new one. I measured and drilled holes for the handle, exactly on center, and then attached the handle with the included screws. One more light sanding and waxing in just a few areas, and then I was done. Ready?
Okay.
Ready?
Yep.
Surprise!
I don't know. Whoa! Oh, that is cool!
Happy birthday!
I was wondering what the chess pieces were. Did you make this?
Yeah.
Wow, that looks awesome. And even the storage area.
Yep.
That is really cool. That's really cool.
And look
Thank you, baby.
If you like this video, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Check out our blog for more how-tos at missiondiy.com. Thanks for watching.